Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today, we're asking a pretty fundamental question. How do we really understand history? Is it all just, chaos? A string of random events pushed along by a few powerful people? Or are there maybe deeper patterns, sort of hidden processes shaping things? Our mission today is to explore historical materialism. It's a powerful method for looking at how societies develop, but it's also often misunderstood. We want to pull out the key insights, maybe challenge some assumptions, and give you a bit of a shortcut to grasping this pretty complex idea. Now, it's really important to say up front, our sources for this deep dive are mainly articles and videos from In Defense of Marxism and the Revolutionary Communist International. So they offer a specific, detailed Marxist viewpoint on this. Our aim here is just to report neutrally on their arguments, on what they say. We want to help you understand their framework without us taking any political side. We're just conveying the ideas from their material.
Exactly. It's presented as a specific lens, and yeah, our sources really lay out what they mean by historical materialism, from the basics right through to how they apply it.
Okay, so if we're looking for these hidden mainsprings, as you called them, where does this approach, historical materialism, actually start? What's the basic idea?
Well, according to these sources, historical materialism aims to analyze what they call the hidden mainsprings that lie behind the development of human society.
Oh,
And that means looking all the way back from the earliest tribal societies right up to, well, today. The core idea really is that history isn't just about the surface events, the kings and queens and battles. It's shaped by deeper material forces.
hidden mainsprings. Yeah, that phrase definitely paints a picture, like the inner workings of a clock, maybe, not just random ticks. Suggests there's a structure underneath.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
The sources present this materialist conception of history as a, quote, scientific method. And the purpose of this method is to help us understand history, not as just, unconnected and unforeseen incidents, but rather as a clearly understood and interrelated process. The thinking is, if you look at the underlying material conditions, you start to see the connections, the logic that might otherwise be missed.
Right, so connecting the dots, seeing how things fit together. And what aspects of society does this process cover? Is it just economics or broader?
Oh, it's broad. Very broad. It covers politics, economics, and the whole spectrum of social development.
Mm.
So the task, as they see it, for historical materialism is to lay bare the complex dialectical relationship between all these phenomena.
Okay, dialectical. That's a key term here, isn't it? For listeners who might not be familiar, could you maybe quickly unpack what that means in this context? Is it about, contradictions?
Yeah, essentially. When the sources use dialectical, they're talking about a process of constant tension, interaction, and change. Think of it as a dynamic interplay. Opposing forces or contradictions within society, maybe different economic classes or new technology clashing with old ways of doing things, even ideas clashing. They interact, they push and pull, and that transforms things. It leads to new developments. So it's not simple cause and effect. It's more like everything's connected and evolving together.
That sounds incredibly ambitious, trying to connect all those threads. But, like any big theory about how society works, this one definitely gets pushback. It faces criticism. What are some of the common critiques that historical materialism runs into?
That's a really important point, and the sources do address it directly. They mention that many critics, particularly those they describe as bourgeois, liberal, and postmodern historians, which is their term for certain academic viewpoints, they tend to reject the Marxist view that history is driven by material laws and processes.
Mm.
These critics, according to our sources, often argue the opposite, that history is basically random, punctuated by exceptional individuals. The great man theory of history, essentially.
Right, the idea that it's just luck or a few key people making all the difference versus this materialist view of deeper forces. What's interesting is how historical materialism kind of flips that randomness argument, isn't it?
It does. It poses some challenging questions back to those critics. The sources ask, essentially, if history is just random, then why is it that similar conditions result in similar events, outcomes, and characters reoccurring across history?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe an even sharper question they raise is, has there really been no progress between stone tools and spacecraft?
Mm.
From the materialist perspective these sources outline, these questions really challenge that idea of pure randomness. They suggest there are patterns, there is development, often tied to how we organize ourselves, how we produce things.
That is a strong counter-argument. Another big charge you often hear against Marxism and historical materialism specifically is that it's fatalistic or teleological. Like
Yeah.
it suggests everything's preordained, right? A script that we're all just following
Mm.
with no real room for people to act. How do the sources respond to that?
Yeah, that's a common one. Our sources describe that interpretation as a major misunderstanding, often a caricature of the actual theory. The accusation is, like you said, that it makes Marxism seem like a religion with the role of God replaced by iron laws of history,
Mm.
end quote. And the implication there is that there's no role for active, conscious human beings to change history. But what's insightful, according to these texts, is that historical materialism, as they present it, actually emphasizes the crucial role of active, conscious human beings in making history. It's about understanding the material stage, the conditions, but also seeing how people, through their choices and actions, react to and, importantly, change those conditions.
Okay, so it's not about people being puppets. It's more like they're actors on a stage that has certain features, certain limitations, but they still write parts of the play themselves within those mainsprings. That's a critical difference. It reminds me of what Marx himself said about truth and practice. Exactly. Marx's second thesis on Feuerbach is really relevant here. He states, the question whether objective truth can be attributed to human thinking is not a question of theory, but is a practical question. Man must prove the truth in practice. What that means in this context is that understanding history isn't just some abstract academic game. It's deeply tied to human action, to struggles, to trying to change the world. The insight is that the knowledge you gain from analyzing history this way is meant to be a tool, something to inform conscious action.
Right, reframes it completely. It's not about destiny, but about understanding the conditions you're working within or against.
Okay, let's make this more concrete. Can you give us some examples of historical materialism, sort of, in action? How has this method actually been applied to understand specific historical events or structures?
Sure. A key thing this method does, according to the sources, is shine a light on big historical shifts by looking at what's happening underneath, materially. Take the rise of capitalism, for example. Marx had that very famous, very stark phrase. Capital emerged on the stage of history, dripping blood from every pore. Now, that's not just powerful language. The sources argue it points to the actual, often brutal, violent processes that were necessary for capitalism to emerge from feudalism.
Yeah, it forces you to look past the neat narratives, maybe the idea that capitalism just sort of naturally bloomed. This lens shows that progress, if you want to call it that, can be incredibly violent, exposing the hidden costs. And the sources mention British capitalism specifically.
They do. Fiona Lawley, in one of the source materials, points out that, quote, British capitalism grew rich through slavery. This is used to highlight the violent and tumultuous birth of capitalism out of the embers of feudal society. The insight here, from their perspective, is that economic systems don't just appear peacefully. They're often forged in conflict, exploitation, and immense human suffering. It reveals the material drivers behind those changes.
That's a stark reminder, definitely. Okay, so beyond huge economic shifts like the rise of capitalism, how else has this method been used? Maybe looking at more fundamental social structures.
This is where Frederick Engels' work comes in, specifically his book, The Origins of the Family, Private Property, and the State. Our sources really highlight this. Engels used historical materialism to dig into prehistory, trying to explain how class society came into existence. The insight was connecting the dots between how early human societies evolved, changes in how they produce things, the development of tools, the ability to create a surplus, and how that led over time to private property, distinct social classes, and eventually the state as a way to manage and protect those class interests. It's trying to find the material roots of social divisions.
So understanding the why behind things like class and the state, not just taking them for granted. Okay, and what about people? We talked about human agency. How does historical materialism see the role of individuals compared to, say, mass movements?
Well, again, it's presented as dialectical and interplay. The sources stress that while material conditions create the possibilities, the potential for change, it's ultimately active, conscious human beings who make history happen. The Russian Revolution is a major case study cited by Marxists in our source material. They refer to it as the greatest event in human history.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's seen as an example where the masses, led by the Bolsheviks, took power, where the oppressed and exploited rose up and overthrew the old order. The insight from a historical materialist viewpoint isn't just about Lenin or other leaders, but about how the terrible material conditions, the war, the poverty of peasants and workers, the breakdown of the old system created a situation where millions felt compelled to act consciously, decisively, and transform their society.
Right, a confluence of conditions and conscious action. Now, what about new ideas? Does historical materialism just defend its own turf, or does it engage with, maybe critique newer theories about history?
Oh, it definitely engages critically. According to our sources, they emphasize that. For instance, Josh Holroyd discusses the analysis of theories like the tributary mode of production.
Yeah.
This theory was put forward by some as a kind of update or alternative to Marxist stages of history. But from the perspective of our sources, it's critiqued as being potentially less a development of Marxism than a retreat from it, maybe in response to academic pressure. The argument is that by focusing too much on the political ways surplus was extracted, like taxes or tribute, this theory might downplay the importance of the underlying economic relationships and the development of productive forces, which, for historical materialism, are the real engine of change. So, yes, it shows the method being used critically, evaluating whether new ideas actually advance understanding based on its core principles. It's presented as dynamic, not a static dogma.
I see. So maintaining that focus on the material base is key. And speaking of today, do the sources argue these ideas, from Marx and Engels are still relevant?
Very much so. The authors in our source material argue that these ideas are never more relevant than they are today. They suggest that historical materialism provides essential tools for understanding the global crisis we're passing through: economic instability, social inequality, political turmoil. These are seen as rooted in fundamental material contradictions.
Okay, and that connects to another point mentioned this idea of a dialectical approach, extending even to fields like science. How does that fit in?
Yeah, that's interesting. The sources mention recent scientific papers looking at things like human development way back in prehistory. And they say these findings have reignited the debate and actually reinforced the need to study not just history, but maybe biology, cosmology, with a dialectical approach. What they mean by that is seeing the world, whether it's societies or natural systems, as being in constant motion and contradiction, in permanent transformation, seeing processes as mutually connected, not isolated. It leads to understanding a fascinating complexity. It's about recognizing constant change and interconnectedness everywhere.
Right, so it's a way of thinking that emphasizes change, connections, contradictions, trying to grasp the whole dynamic picture rather than just static snapshots. Well, that was quite the journey. A real deep dive into historical materialism, drawing on those specific sources we mentioned. We've seen how this method, as they present it, offers a lens to try and make sense of history's complexity, looking for those underlying interconnected processes, trying to provide a structure and understanding that goes beyond just surface events or the actions of individuals. It's about digging deeper than the headlines, trying to connect the economic dots with the political ones, with social changes, seeing history as this unfolding, interrelated process driven by those hidden mainsprings. So, for you, listening, here's something to think about. How might using this kind of materialist dialectical lens change how you look at something happening right now? A current event, maybe, or a social issue in your community or globally? What hidden mainsprings might you uncover if you try to look beneath the surface? If you connect the politics, the economics, the social forces, all interacting, all in motion, what patterns might jump out? Something to consider. We hope this gave you some valuable insights today. Keep digging deeper.